Most of the top Billboard songs these days also have an Atmos Spatial mix version, along with an increasingly growing back catalog of albums. The purpose of this video is to present an easy workflow for creating a spatial mix, even if you don't have a 12-speaker Dolby certified studio around the house. And it will be presented by my guest, KamranV, who worked on immersive music releases by Nine Inch Nails, Sting, Beck, Suzanne Ciani, and others, including, I'm most grateful, my recently released live show album. I'll also show you how your listeners can hear spatial mixes you create with this technique, even if they're on a service that doesn't support Atmos, like Spotify. Before I pass it on to Kamran, spoiler, the trick is, rather than thinking of how to make every element of your mix an Atmos object floating in 3D space, to simplify your mix into a 4-speaker mix, 2 front and 2 rear. Over the past few years, I've gone to numerous certified surround venues, and as far as I'm concerned, 4 speakers go a long way towards giving an excellent spatial and musical image. They're easier to set up in your studio, and your listeners are actually likely to hear your music through either binaural headphones, a soundbar with a couple of satellites, or an extra pair of speakers in a studio, as opposed to a full-blown 12-speaker setup. Now, I already made a video with quite a few tips and ideas on easy ways to create and mix 4 channels using simple panners. I'll link to it below. This video will show you how to master and share that music so people can hear it on more than 2 speakers using binaural headphones or other devices they actually have in their hands today. And then one last thing before I hand it over to Kamran, I highly recommend you listen to a spatial mix of music you like with 4 speakers as opposed to a binaural mix with headphones. Nothing beats the real experience, and there are quite a few options to do this. If it's an Atmos mix, you'll need either a device like an Apple TV hooked up to a soundbar with satellites, or on your computer, a streaming service and software that supports Atmos, like Apple Music. You then enable surround on your computer, Mac or PC, depending on how many speakers you have. Like I mentioned, I think 4 are enough. And to start with, the rear speakers can be any brand you have around the house. They don't have to be the same as your front speakers. As long as they're level matched, it's a good way to get an idea of what's going on in space. Then if you're not on an Atmos service, the other option is using technology that's been around for over 20 years and available on many receivers called Dolby Pro Logic 2, or on your computer using a free plugin Kamran wrote called Quark. The beauty of Quark and Pro Logic 2 is that the surround information is encoded in a regular 2-channel stereo stream. And the way it's done, if you listen to it in stereo, it sounds normal, but if you pass it through a decoder, it starts bouncing around in space, assuming it's been encoded properly. And luckily, the free Quark plugin can do that too. Kamran will show you how. I'll also leave a step-by-step process on how to do that in the description. The added benefit of Quark, by the way, is that it doesn't cost extra to share your song on streaming platforms because it's a regular stereo mix, as opposed to Atmos masters, which for me, I use DistroKid, cost another $27 per song. Okay, so with all that said, I'll hand things over to Kamran, who will walk us through the process of taking a 4-channel mix and creating both a 2-channel surround mix and a full-blown Atmos ADM master.
It's KamranV on how I mastered your record. So what I'll walk through is how I took your quadraphonic live performance, mastered it in quad, and then turned it into a immersive compatible stereo mix based on this quad mix using the plugin that I made called Quark, Quadraphonic Universally Accessible Resource Kit. It's free. You can get it at quark.psychic.com. It was funded by the National Endowment for the Arts with DubLab, an amazing nonprofit that I'm also on the board of now. And yeah, it's great. This is how I work with all the Ciani records and many other records. I do a lot of work with AKP recordings, doing live cassettes even in quad, and others. So I'll walk through how it is. I like to use Reaper generally, especially when I can. Most Atmos mixes that I'm doing, I'm having to do it in Pro Tools because of the native renderer and the native panners and all the other stuff that make things a bit faster. But frankly, if I could do it all in Reaper, I would. It's bulletproof. I've used it on a lot of very mission critical projects, and it doesn't crash. It does a lot of really good analytics. It's awesome software, but there's no native Atmos render in it, so it makes it difficult to work in that. But in your case, it's purely quad, so I don't have to worry about all of the things I would have to worry about with multi-channel projects. So I get to use Reaper, so thank you for letting me use Reaper. All right, so here it is. I have 3 sessions. This 4th session is just how I monitor through my system. But I have 3 sessions here, and I have a Pro Tools session, and I use another piece of software called Immersive Master Pro that I use as sort of a utility for things when I'm doing Atmos. So what I'm doing is this first session is the quad mastering. And so this is me taking your quad master breaking out the tracks, and usually tracks, as you can see, kind of end up being volume changes or song changes. And so I master it, I even it out. You can see there's different volumes that I have for each section. And then also, as I'm listening, I find little other spots that need help. Like, for instance, at the beginning, you were really quiet, and I turned it up a bit and crossfaded in different places. And I also made a lot of tonal changes. So in here, there's the Ozone Suite. There's a little bit of AI that I did to sort of figure out some different notch things, but it was only after I found kind of a good curve to work with. And I used this Puig Tech thing, a Pultec EQ that Jack Joseph Puig made for waves, and then sort of fix some things. And you can see, like, I take stuff out, and then I put stuff back in over here, and then I take it out again. These are all, part of sculpting the sound. Everyone has a different way to do it, but for your show, which many live shows are compromised for various reasons, it was really bass heavy, and the idea was sort of evening all of the stuff out a little bit. So you see, you just have different pieces in here. It's pretty front and rear. I try to keep it pretty similar. This is the Ozone Imager as well. And so for the rear, I can show you a little bit, actually. So what's interesting about the quadraphonic encoding is that because this encoding, the way it works is it takes the rear channels, and there's a plus and negative 90-degree phase shift that is happening. And then it is basically folded into the front. So the rears have plus and minus negative degree at 90-degree phase shift, and that's folded into the rear. There's a little bit of, magic to that, and magic how it unfolds it. There's an envelope that with the way that it all works. But because there's plus and minus 90, if you take that and add it up, it equals 0, which means there's phase canceling. So if something is panned to the center rear, when it is played back in mono, it will phase cancel. So this is when you're in a grocery store, or a single Sonos speaker, or Amazon speaker, you will lose some information. And so just like when you're doing a stereo mix and you're checking your mono, I'm doing a quad mix and checking my stereo and checking my mono. And so what I did on yours is I just added just a little bit here to widen it. And as you can see, like if I were to take that and narrow it, you kind of see what it looks like. And so I just widened it just a little bit so that elements that were going through the middle don't get lost in mono, and basically have some, volume rides. And so this is just a way that I help prep it for the ultimate stereo version of it as well. But I do find it really helps in the Quad Master and the Atmos Master to do this. And I'm doing it in a way that's quite subtle. And the reason why I'm doing it now instead of just on the stereo version is I try to keep my mixes consistent between immersive and stereo. And so all of it, just like the checking your mono when you do stereo, all of it is all trying to find that happy medium where your mix finds a comfortable place to be. So that's what I'm doing here. And so anyway, there's the front and the rear. This is some of the processing that I was doing there. And, it turned out really, really nice. Pulled out some of the things that were peeking out when I was in that Ozone piece here, where you see that dynamic. There were some things that were popping out. This clarity was also really helping because there was a bit of muddiness in certain places. And really nice and smooth with the way it turned out. Show turned out great. So I took this, and in Reaper, the way I figure out all these volumes is I like to keep the rhythm or the wave of the show. I'm not always trying to get the exactly perfect volumes where each track is exactly the same loudness and all this kind of stuff. I'll sort of ride the loudness a little bit. I know Luft's is already an average, but I just try to, like, track to track have a little bit of vibe difference. And so I have this sort of elaborate way that I do it using, math and spreadsheets and stuff like that, of measuring the loudness across the board, and then, taking that and turning it into things. So I can show you a little bit of that here. So this is just a spreadsheet. These are the timings that you gave me of the tracks, which I'll show you a little bit later. And then I'll go in here and I'll find out, this is sort of where we started with our loudness in your audio. And I'm trying to get it to a little bit better of a range in preparation for Dolby Atmos. And so this is approximately where I think I ended up doing a little bit of a different loudness, just because there were some things about when I shaped the EQ that it felt a little better not to try and push it to be exactly those numbers, but it's a guide, and it helps me a lot. And so I take this, export it in Reaper as one big long audio track, and then to make the Dolby Atmos version, and keep in mind, I'm constantly listening to this in Quark, in stereo, because not only do I want the immersive to sound great and the quad to sound great, but I also want the stereo to sound great. And so I'm constantly listening through Quark, which is right here. And so right now, so there's the Quark encode. So this is what it is without it. This is the encode. This is encode decode. You know, and right now what you're hearing is sort of everything, but this is ultimately what it sounds like. And so as I'm listening, I'm making sure I'm going back and forth there and making sure that both the stereo and the quad sound its best, and frankly the mono. I'll even check mono here. So I take that quad master, I'll pull it into, in this case, I'm pulling it into Pro Tools because it has a really great native renderer, and I will put the 4 channels in the 4 corners, and I prefer to do this instead of doing it in the bed because you end up with a smaller file, and I just prefer it. It scales up and down good. Some folks will put the rears in the quote 5.1 rear speakers, and what that does is if you have a 7.1 room, it will play it back effectively on the sides. Don't like that. And if you put it in the rears, you would have to have a much even larger file, a 7.1 file or 7.1 bed, and it just ends up being, over twice as big as the file needs to be. So why would we do that? And this scales up and down perfectly in 5.1 rooms, 7.1 rooms, all that stuff. So anyway, this is the way I like to do it. Not everyone likes to do it this way. I also, generally speaking, do not like to use an LFE in music, and I generally don't like to use a center channel except for effects. I kind of hold by that rule as it's for dialogue, but sometimes I'll throw like a weird instrument in there. But most times I am staying out of the center. I'm not even panning through the center. I'll use a phantom center because a lot of these playback systems use processing, and it's either louder in the center because it's for dialogue, or it is narrowed out to carve out the dialogue even more and make it easier to hear. And so many people, when they're listening back on an immersive system, are getting that center processed, and I have heard it way too many times where the mix just does not sound good. All right, so anyway, take this. I have a very particular way that I encode all of this. I can show you, where is it? My Atmos render is here. You see it's just the 4 objects, and then you can see I have a very particular way that I'll do my trim and mix down, or down mix stuff. I do not do the default trim of all this stuff. It's all zeroed out. I heard, I think, some mixes of the In Excess Kick record, which is generally great, but when you listen to it in 5.1 instead of full Atmos, because all of this stuff is on, when it goes to 7.1 and then down to 5.1 and all this stuff, you end up many dB down, and those vocal stacks don't sound as good as they intended. The other thing I do that's quite uncommon is I use direct render with room balance for the 5.1, down mix, and I actually use LTRT for the stereo. And what that is LTRT, Dolby Pro Logic 2 with phase 90, is closer to Quark than the LORO. And again, this is all my weird way of keeping things consistent, where I have one mix for everything and it sounds as close to as I intended it as possible in every possible way that this could get played back, because Atmos files sometimes will get played back, and these downmix controls are used to render it in a certain way. And so, again, my weird way, not everyone agrees with it or likes it, but this is how I get consistency, and I've done many listening tests to decide that this is the way I like it. But again, it's not for everyone. It's not for every music. And frankly, as someone that does pretty much exclusively immersive records, like, I don't think everything should be immersive. Like all the old stuff that's been remixed in Atmos and all that, I don't know, 90% of the time an up mixer is more than enough if you want to put it in more speakers. Some of these remixes are pretty terrible and pointless. But again, my opinion. All right, so so get this. I make the Atmos file from my quad master, and then I'll also use this really amazing tool called Immersive Master Pro. I put in your timings, get all my numbers where they need to be in a good place, and this takes way less time than doing it through the Dolby Atmos renderer, because you can do it all at once instead of one at a time. I've been talking with them. I hope at some point they add some features in there that I suggested to them. There's so much potential for this software. Frankly, I'm a little jealous I didn't do the software myself, because I'd been struggling with this for so many years, and just this way of being able to compute loudness like this, an ungodly amount of hours have been saved just by that alone, and that's frankly all I use this for. I do that, and then I'll process it, and it will break apart the tracks for me, which, the Dolby Atmos renderer can do all of this. It just is many manual steps to do it. So it's really a great piece of software. Yeah, so now after all that, we have our Dolby Atmos masters. So we have the full master of the full record, we have the individual tracks, and it's all coming from this quad master that I made in Reaper. From there, I need to make a stereo master. So I take the full quad mix, and I have these exact same timings here so that I can cut them up using Reaper as well. If you haven't seen that in Reaper, there's a lot of ways that you can do it, but in Reaper there is this all project regions, and it will cut it up into 7 different tracks for you. So it's really, really awesome. All right. So in here, now that I'm preparing it to be a stereo file, there's a couple things that I do. The first thing I told you about this imager. So I just turned it on because I was playing with it, but I'd found that this would, in yours, this part is off because I already did this, but this is just to show you kind of how the master is used. And so, it's definitely it prevents phase issues. And so I'm not going to double it up, but I just had it in there to show you what the master looked like. And, there is some more processing that I'm doing here. You may be wondering, why is there a low pass filter and why is there a high pass filter and why is there extra tracks? There's 6 tracks. This is a quad thing. Well, in addition to that phase canceling issue that I prevent with the isotope ozone imager, there's also a complaint of these old school records that when low end is in the rear and it goes through this 90-degree phase shift, it gets a little phasey, and that's true. And sometimes it sounds cool. Sometimes I like it, frankly, but many times it doesn't sound as great. And this is a way to avoid the phasiness and bring back the low end to the stereo in a tighter way. It tightens up the bass. And so the neat thing about the way the quad encoding and decoding works is because when you decode it, you're usually decoding it through a 5.1 system or whatever. There's bass management, there's all this stuff. The directionality of the decoded rear low end is just not an issue in those systems. And then also with the sort of fuzzy way that it decodes this, you don't miss the rear low end. It's kind of crazy. I discovered this a while ago. I hadn't always done it this way, but I can't remember which record I was working on, but there was a record I was working on where the phasiness in the rear wasn't satisfying me, and I figured, there's a way to do this. And so what I do is I take the front, and the front stays in the front, and then I duplicate the rear into 2 more channels, and I'll high pass in the rear, and that still goes to the rear, and then that duplicated low pass, that duplicated rear, I will low pass. In this case, I'm using, these numbers are kind of where I start, and with yours, it worked really good with what you had, but sometimes I'll change it. But 120 hertz and 90 hertz with this sort of steepish curve here, right? And, just sounds good. And I took that, I'm actually sending this to the front. So this is going to the front, and this is going to the rear. And so, see, 3, 4, that means it's going to the rear channels. And then in here, 1, 2, it's going to the front channels. And it just really tightens the bass. So I'll play it back and let you hear it a little bit. I think this section's pretty bassy. Yeah, there you go. This is pretty spacey. So this is just the bass from the rear. Now here is the bass from the rear and the rest of the rear. And that's without the low end. So again, that's getting sent to the front. And right now, just so you know, you're monitoring everything in Quark. So that's why you can hear everything. And so this is, the front has all that together already. And so that's the front with the extra rear, the low. And so you just end up with this really tight thing. So I'll play that same section as without the low end. And then here it is again without that processing. Now there's with the processing. Just really tightens it up. It's really awesome. So anyway, little trick. I hope other people learn from this and do it too. And what it does is I'm effectively using an identical mix all the way through, and I'm just, sort of sculpting it from quad to Atmos down to stereo. So then I will export this as one big long track as well, and take it and pull it into a stereo master, and I will do some light mastering with this because we did most of the tonal work up front. Sometimes I'll add some EQ, sometimes I won't, but for this, I just added a limiter to each one. And so each one of them has its own limiter. And then this quadraphonic processing actually does have some volume changes that happen. Pretty even across the track, but sometimes I'll add little boosts and bops in different places, but with yours, it worked out pretty good. You see, so this one's, added 8.5, this one added 9, this one added 7.2. And the reason is because stereo masters are just louder than Atmos masters, where you're at -18 for an Atmos master, and for stereo, you can go a lot hotter. I mean, some people go up to -9. I didn't do that on this. I think it was like around -14 or so, maybe a little higher. But yeah, just getting a little bit more level. I know you wanted it pretty hot, and so you can see the places where it gets a little squished. And yeah, that's how I made your quadraphonic master. And then of course, because it's quad, you can, if you just look down here at the meters, we have our Quark decoder, right? And so you see how that goes out to 4 channels. And so that's all how it works. All right, man. Well, Zeev, thanks for always supporting all these weird gear and all of these mutants like us that like to play around with this stuff. Also, if you want a little bit more background on what I was talking about, my philosophy on the center channel and the LFE, actually, I did an article as a part of my research for MIT, and it's at cycik.com/quad-is-musical. It was in their, what was it, Quadraphonic Quarterly or Quarterly Quad newsletter. It's a little research paper I did, and it was in there, and so you can see it here. There's the link. And yeah, you can check it out. So anyway, thanks for supporting. Talk to you later.